At precisely 11:42 p.m., the world outside the penthouse suite was a silent, glittering tapestry. From his vantage point high above Geneva, Liam Vance could see the city lights bleed into the inky blackness of the lake, a view that normally soothed the restless hum of his mind. It was a sterile, perfect silence, one he had curated at the cost of billions. Tonight, however, it was shattered by the insistent, abrasive vibration of a burner phone on the marble nightstand. He almost let it die, a practiced reflex honed over years of insulating himself from a world that always wanted something. But a sound, small and fragile, cut through the encrypted connection before he could dismiss it. A voice. A girl's voice. So thin it was barely a whisper. Hoarse from what sounded like hours of crying, yet laced with a thread of steel he hadn't heard in years. "Are you my dad?" The question hung in the chilled air, an impossible, absurd missile aimed directly at the core of his fortified existence. Liam sat bolt upright, the fine Italian sheets pooling around his waist. His heart, a metronome that beat only for market fluctuations and corporate takeovers, began to hammer against his ribs with a wild, unfamiliar rhythm. "My mum is in the ICU," the small voice continued, gaining a desperate momentum. "The doctor said only family can sign. Dad, Mum needs you." The world tilted. The polished surfaces of his life, the clean lines of his empire, the impenetrable walls around his heart, they all began to crack under the weight of those three words. Dad, Mom needs you. He knew, with a certainty that felt like ice water flooding his veins, who Mom was. Emily. Emily Miller. A name he had systematically, brutally erased from every ledger of his life 7 years ago. The call, he realized with a jolt, was coming from a payphone. The static, the hollow echo. It was the sound of a world he had long since left behind, a world of desperation. The name, a ghost on his tongue, dragged him back 7 years to a reality far from Geneva penthouses. He was in her tiny New York apartment, the one that always smelled faintly of rain and vanilla. Sunlight streamed through the single large window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. He was younger then, his ambition a monstrous, insatiable thing, his gaze fixed on a future paved with code and capital. Emily stood before him, her hands twisting in the fabric of her simple dress. Her eyes, usually so full of light, were clouded with a mixture of terror and hope. "Liam," she had said, her voice trembling, "I'm pregnant." He remembered the silence that followed, how he had processed her words not as a miracle, but as a variable, an unforeseen complication in a meticulously crafted 5-year plan. He saw the way her hand instinctively went to her stomach, a gesture of protection. He saw the plea in her eyes, a silent request for him to see this not as a problem to be solved, but as a life to be welcomed. He had chosen to see the problem. "And you're sure it's mine?" The question was a scalpel, designed to cut deep and clean. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "Of course, I'm sure. Liam, this is us." He had stepped back, creating a physical distance that mirrored the chasm he was about to open between them. "Emily," he began, his voice devoid of all warmth, a tool he often used in boardrooms to signal the end of a negotiation. "My life is on a very specific trajectory. There is no room for this, for a child. It's a liability I cannot afford." "A liability?" she whispered, the word striking her like a physical blow. "This is our baby, not a line item on a spreadsheet." "Everything is a line item," he'd countered. His cruelty honed to a razor's edge. He saw her as a trap, a desperate attempt to anchor herself to his rising star. He couldn't see the love, only the perceived threat to his absolute control. He'd pulled out his checkbook, an act of such profound condescension it made her flinch. "I'll make sure you're taken care of, find a solution, but my involvement ends here." This conversation never happened. He had left her standing in that patch of sunlight, the unsigned check on her small kitchen table, a monument to his cowardice. He had walked away and never looked back, burying the memory under layers of success. Each billion-dollar acquisition another shovelful of dirt on the grave of the man he might have been. If you believe no woman should ever have to hear those words, that a human life is more than a liability, show your support by tapping the like button and let us know. He had convinced himself he'd made the only logical choice. Now, 7 years later, that choice was calling him from a hospital payphone in a child's desperate plea. "Please!" The little girl's voice cracked, pulling him violently back to the present. "They won't let me see her again if someone doesn't come." The silence in the penthouse was no longer peaceful. It was suffocating, filled with the ghosts of his past decisions. The reclusive billionaire who commanded global markets, who could bend senators and CEOs to his will with a single phone call, was being undone by the unfiltered desperation of a 7-year-old child, his daughter. He didn't think. For the first time in his adult life, Liam Vance acted on pure, unadulterated instinct. An instinct that wasn't driven by profit or power, but by a sudden, terrifying fear. It was a fear far greater than any market crash, a fear of an emotional bankruptcy from which he might never recover. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice raspy, foreign to his own ears. "Mercy Hospital downtown." He didn't say goodbye. He simply ended the call and moved with a speed that was frantic, chaotic. He threw on the first clothes he could find, a pair of jeans and a plain black sweater that felt like a costume. He grabbed a wallet, his keys, the burner phone. The man who never moved without a full security detail and a pre-planned itinerary was striding through his silent, opulent prison, a man possessed. He dialed his pilot on his primary phone. The call was answered on the first ring. "Sir?" "Ready the jet?" Liam commanded, his voice tight, clipped. "Now. Destination, Teterboro, New York. File the flight plan. I'll be at the airfield in 10 minutes. There was no hesitation on the other end, just a crisp, "Yes, sir." As he stepped into the private elevator, the cold steel doors sliding shut, he caught a glimpse of his reflection. He saw a man with haunted eyes, a man whose carefully constructed empire meant nothing. The billions, the power, the privacy, it was all a fragile shield that had just been pierced by a little girl's voice from half a world away. As the private jet tore through the night sky, climbing above the sleeping continent, Liam didn't look at the stars. He stared into the darkness, the words echoing in his mind. "Dad, Mom needs you." He was flying not toward a deal, but toward a reckoning. And for the very first time in his life, Liam Vance had absolutely no control over what would happen next. The sterile, unforgiving white of the hospital corridor was a physical assault. Liam Vance, a man accustomed to the muted tones of bespoke interiors and the soft ambient glow of billion-dollar boardrooms, felt as though the fluorescent lights were stripping him bare, layer by layer. The air, thick with the scent of antiseptic and something vaguely metallic, like old pennies and fear, clung to the back of his throat. He had crossed an ocean in less than a day, moving through private terminals and chauffeured cars like a phantom. But here, in this public space of quiet suffering, his power meant nothing. He was just a man in a rumpled suit, his knuckles white as he clutched the phone that had shattered his universe. A nurse with weary but kind eyes approached him, a clipboard held against her chest like a shield. "Mr. Vance? I'm Sarah. We need you to sign some forms for Emily Miller's care." The name spoken aloud in this clinical context was a gut punch. Emily Miller. Not the ghost from his past. Not a regret he kept locked away, but a patient, a series of typed lines on a form. Liam followed her to a small, cluttered desk, his movements stiff and unnatural. He took the pen she offered, his hand, a hand that had signed deals capable of shifting global economies, now trembling so violently he could barely grip it. He saw the fields for name, relationship, consent for treatment. He paused at relationship. What was he? The man who had abandoned her? The biological prerequisite for a child he'd never met? He wrote guardian, the word feeling like a lie and a prophecy all at once. His signature, usually a decisive slash of ink, was hesitant, a jagged line that mirrored the fracture in his soul. "Thank you," the nurse said, her voice gentle. "The doctor will be with you shortly. Her daughter Chloe is with her now. She hasn't left her side." Chloe. The name was another blow. Liam nodded numbly, his throat too tight to speak. When the nurse led him toward the double doors of the intensive care unit, Each step felt heavier than the last. The rhythmic electronic beeping grew louder, a symphony of survival that sounded to Liam like a countdown. The world outside these walls, the markets, the deadlines, the empire, had evaporated. There was only the sound of the machines keeping Emily alive. He stopped in the doorway, his breath catching. There, amidst a tangled web of tubes and wires, lay Emily. She was a pale, fragile echo of the woman he remembered. The vibrant energy, the fire in her eyes that had both captivated and terrified him, was gone, replaced by a profound stillness. Her face, etched with lines of exhaustion and pain he had no right to witness, was turned toward the window, her chest rising and falling in a shallow, machine-assisted rhythm. 7 years. He had imagined her moving on, building a new life, perhaps even hating him with a passion that would have been a form of connection. He had never, in his most selfish or detached moments, imagined this utter vulnerability, this teetering on the edge of oblivion. If your heart is also breaking for what he finds, leave a like to show you're with him on this impossible journey. And then he saw her, sitting on a small stool pulled right up to the bed. A tiny figure with a cascade of dark hair was a little girl, Chloe. She was holding her mother's limp hand, her small back ramrod straight, a miniature sentinel on duty. She didn't seem to notice him at first, her entire focus on the still form in the bed. Then, as if sensing a shift in the air, she slowly turned her head. Liam's world tilted again. It wasn't just the dark hair, a mirror of Emily's. It was her eyes, they were his. The same piercing, impossibly blue eyes that stared back at him from every mirror, every press photo. In them, however, there was none of his cold calculation or guarded suspicion. There was only a child's deep ancient sorrow and a sliver of cautious curiosity. He stood frozen, a stranger, an intruder. He was the reason for this, the architect of this pain. The years of struggle Emily must have endured alone, the weight of raising a child while he insulated himself with wealth. It all crashed down on him. For a moment, he wanted to run, flee back to the sterile safety of his penthouse where feelings could be quantified and risks mitigated. But Chloe didn't look away. She didn't cry or accuse. She simply watched him, her gaze unwavering. Then she did something that broke through every defense he had ever constructed. She slowly let go of her mother's hand, slid off the stool, and walked toward him. She stopped a few feet away, a tiny, impossibly brave creature in a world of giants and beeping machines. She looked down at his trembling hand, then back up at his face. And then, with a quiet solemnity that was utterly devastating, she reached out her small hand and gently placed it in his. It was not a plea, it was not a demand. It was a silent, fragile test. This time, will you stay? The warmth of her small fingers, the implicit trust in that simple gesture, was an agony and a revelation. For the first time in his life, Liam Vance felt a terror that had nothing to do with market volatility or corporate espionage. It was a raw, unadulterated fear of failing this small person, of confirming the truth he already knew, that he was unworthy of this trust. He knelt down, his expensive suit creasing on the linoleum floor, and wrapped his other hand around hers, a silent vow passing between them in the humming silence of the ICU. He would stay. He stayed for 3 days. 3 days that felt like an eternity. He sat in the uncomfortable vinyl chair, his world shrinking to the rise and fall of Emily's chest and the erratic dance of the lines on the heart monitor. He learned the nurses' names, the rhythm of their shifts, the subtle changes in the beeping that signified stability or distress. He coordinated with his office through terse, encrypted messages, delegating control of his empire with a detachment that would have been unthinkable a week ago. He and Chloe existed in a silent partnership. They shared lukewarm coffee and juice boxes from the hospital cafeteria. He learned she liked her sandwiches with the crusts cut off, and that she hummed a little tune when she was drawing, pictures of a smiling woman and a little girl under a bright yellow sun. A man was conspicuously absent from every drawing. On the 4th day, Emily stirred. It wasn't dramatic. Her eyelids just fluttered, a faint groan escaping her lips. Liam was by her side in an instant. Chloe right behind him, her small hand clutching his. Emily's eyes slowly opened, unfocused at first, then sharpening with a painful clarity. They scanned the room, the machines, Chloe, and then they landed on him. There was no shock, no gasp of recognition, just a profound, bone-deep weariness, followed by a flicker of something hard and resolute. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was a dry, rasping whisper, but every word was a steel blade. Liam. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, an acknowledgement of an unwelcome reality. "Emily," he breathed, his own voice hoarse with a mixture of relief and dread. Her eyes moved from his face to Chloe's, who was now hiding slightly behind Liam's leg. A wave of fierce protective energy seemed to emanate from her, a mother's strength overriding her body's weakness. "Why are you here?" she whispered. I got a call, Chloe." "I know what she did," Emily interrupted, her gaze unwavering. "Listen to me." She took a shallow, pained breath. "You left. You made your choice 7 years ago. You don't get to come back now because you feel guilty." "I want to help," Liam said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. "Help?" Her whisper was laced with a bitterness that cut him to the core. "Chloe has a life. It's not the life you could have given her, but it is hers. It is ours. It's stable. She is loved." Her eyes locked onto his, and he saw the woman he had once known, the fighter, the truth-teller. "If you are going to be in her life for a week or a month, only to disappear again when this is over, if you are going to break her heart, you will do it now. You will walk out that door and you will not come back. Do not let her get used to the idea of you, only to rip it away. The damage you would do then would be 1,000 times worse than anything you've done before." It wasn't an accusation. It was a searing indictment, an impossible choice delivered with the last of her strength. Stay and risk destroying them with his inconsistency, or leave and cement his status as the villain of their lives forever. In that moment, the man who had built an empire on calculated risks and strategic exits understood, with chilling, terrifying clarity, that the true risk had never been about losing billions. The true risk was standing right here, in this sterile room, holding a little girl's hand and choosing to stay, choosing to face the messy, unpredictable, and profoundly human reality of a commitment he had never been brave enough to make. Against every instinct that had screamed for control, for distance, for the sterile safety of his Geneva penthouse, Liam Vance chose to stay. The word was not spoken. It was an action, a quiet surrender. After Emily's warning, her voice thin but laced with the unbending steel of a mother protecting her young, he simply sank back into the hard plastic chair by her hospital bed. The motion was a concession, an acknowledgement that for the first time in his life the terms were not his to dictate. His world, once a global chessboard he commanded with ruthless precision, had shrunk to the size of this small beeping room, and the only move that mattered was stillness. His transformation began not with a grand gesture, but with a series of small, humbling failures. The day Emily was discharged, he found himself in her tiny, cramped apartment kitchen, a space that could fit inside his walk-in closet with room to spare. He stared at the cheap coffee maker as if it were an alien artifact. His hands, which had once signed billion-dollar contracts without a tremor, fumbled with the flimsy plastic lid and the paper filter. The resulting brew was a pale, watery disgrace. When he handed a mug to Emily, who was resting on the worn-out sofa, a blanket tucked around her legs, he braced for a sarcastic remark. Instead, a small, weary smile touched her lips for a fraction of a second before vanishing. It was not forgiveness, not even warmth, but it was something. It was a crack in the ice. Then came the school run. The first morning, Liam, dressed in a bespoke Italian suit, stood amidst a sea of parents in yoga pants and hoodies outside Chloe's elementary school. He felt more out of place than he ever had in a hostile boardroom. The other mothers and fathers stared, their whispers a low hum he could feel on his skin. But then Chloe, her small hand clutching his tightly, looked up at him with shining eyes, proud to be walked to the door by this tall, serious man. "That's my dad," she whispered to a friend, a declaration that both thrilled and terrified Liam. In that moment, the judgment of the world melted away, replaced by the profound weight of that single, simple title. The most difficult ordeal was Emily's physical therapy. Twice a week he would drive her to a clinic, the silence in the car thick with unspoken history. He would sit in the corner of the sterile room and watch as Emily fought. He saw the grimaces of pain she tried to hide, the beads of sweat on her brow as she pushed her body to obey, to mend the damage that had been inflicted upon it. He witnessed a form of strength he had never understood, not the power to dominate, but the sheer unyielding grit to endure. This was the woman he had abandoned, not weak and clinging as he had cynically imagined, but a quiet warrior. The guilt was a physical thing, a knot tightening in his chest until it was hard to breathe. He started bringing her a bottle of water, wordlessly placing it beside her. It was a pathetic offering, he knew, but it was all he had. The walls he had spent a lifetime building finally crumbled one Tuesday night, just after midnight. A piercing scream from Chloe's room jolted him from a light, restless sleep on the couch. He was in her room before he was fully awake, his heart pounding. Chloe was sitting bolt upright in her bed, her small body trembling, tears streaming down her face. "The car!" she sobbed, her voice choked with terror. "It was coming for Mommy again." Liam didn't think. He simply sat on the edge of her bed and pulled her into his arms, wrapping her in a hug that felt both foreign and fundamentally right. He rocked her gently, murmuring soft, meaningless reassurances, his cheek pressed against her hair. He felt her small heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic, terrified rhythm. He held her until the trembling subsided, until her breathing evened out into the soft cadence of sleep. Sitting there in the dark, with the weight of his daughter asleep in his arms, Liam Vance felt a profound and terrifying shift deep within his soul. This was not a calculated risk. This was not a strategic investment. This was love, fierce and protective and utterly overwhelming. It was the first truly selfless emotion he had felt in over a decade, and it laid him bare. But as the fragile routines of their new life began to solidify, a darker undercurrent made itself known. The domesticity was a thin veil over a truth he was beginning to dread. One afternoon, while looking for a first aid kit in a cluttered closet, his fingers brushed against a worn, spiral-bound notebook. It was filled with Emily's neat, compact handwriting, a mix of shorthand, dates, and names. He recognized one, Varden Industries, a monolithic pharmaceutical corporation known for its aggressive legal tactics. He saw notes about clinical trials, internal whistleblowers, and a name circled several times, Marcus Thorne, Varden's notoriously ruthless CEO. It was the work of an investigative journalist, and Liam felt a chill snake down his spine. The accident replayed in his mind, suddenly looking far less like a random tragedy. He tried to ask Emily about it, feigning a casual tone as he helped her with dinner. "I saw an old notebook of yours in," he began. "Looked like you were working on a big story." The change in her was instantaneous and absolute. The cautious openness in her eyes vanished, replaced by a shuttered, guarded expression he knew all too well from his own business dealings. "It's nothing," Emily said, her voice flat. "Just old work. It doesn't matter anymore." But her hands, as she chopped vegetables, were suddenly unsteady. She wouldn't meet his gaze. The wall between them was back, higher and thicker than before, and Liam realized it wasn't just there to protect her from him, but to protect him and Chloe from something else entirely. The feeling of being watched started subtly. A dark sedan, always parked a block away from Chloe's school at pickup time, a hang-up call on the apartment landline, followed by chilling silence. Liam, whose senses were honed to detect the slightest shifts in the corporate landscape, felt the familiar prickle of a threat. His instincts, long dormant in this new domestic life, flared to life. He started varying his routes to the school, scanning crowds for familiar faces, his body tensing every time a car slowed near them. The man who had been fumbling with coffee and cartoons was being replaced by the man who had built an empire by anticipating his enemy's every move. The true nature of the danger became terrifyingly clear on a sunny Saturday afternoon at the park. While Chloe was on the swings, her laughter echoing in the crisp air, a man sat down on the bench next to Liam. He was nondescript, dressed in a grey windbreaker, but his eyes were cold and empty. "Beautiful little girl," the man said, his voice a low, conversational rumble that didn't match the menace in his eyes. "Be a shame if something happened to her, or to her mother." Some stories are better left unfinished. Tell your wife to remember that. Before Liam could react, the man stood up and walked away, melting back into the crowd of families. The blood drained from Liam's face. The threat was no longer a suspicion. It was a promise. He scooped a protesting Chloe off the swing set, his mind racing, a cold, calculated fury rising within him. They had miscalculated. They thought he was just a ghost from Emily's past. They didn't know who he was, the power he wielded, the resources at his command. They had threatened the one thing in the world he now realized he could not live without. Back in the apartment, after putting a movie on for Chloe, he walked into the bedroom and closed the door. He pulled out his burner phone, the one he kept for emergencies of a global financial scale. His fingers flew across the keypad, dialing a number known by only 3 other people on the planet. The voice on the other end was clipped, professional. "Sir?" Liam's voice was dangerously quiet, stripped of all warmth, all hesitation. It was the voice that had toppled corporations and made powerful men tremble. "I need a full workup on Varden Industries and its CEO Marcus Thorne," Liam commanded. "Surveillance, financials, personal histories, everything. I want to know every secret they have. And I want a full round-the-clock security detail on Emily Miller and Chloe Miller. Invisible, but absolute. They are not to be touched. Do you understand?" "Understood, sir." Liam hung up. The war had come to his doorstep. He had spent years using his power for profit and control. Now, for the first time, he would unleash its full, devastating force for protection, for them. The world narrowed to the rhythmic metronomic beep of the heart monitor. It was the only sound that mattered, a fragile thread of life in the sterile, antiseptic silence of the intensive care unit. Liam sat hunched in the uncomfortable plastic chair, his gaze locked on the rise and fall of Emily's chest beneath the thin white blanket. Chloe was asleep in his lap, her small body heavy with exhaustion, her soft breaths a ghost against his shirt. For a moment, a fragile peace settled over him. For a moment, he let himself believe this was a new beginning. Then, the rhythm broke. A single elongated tone ripped through the quiet, followed by a frantic, high-pitched alarm. The green line on the monitor, the one he had been watching for days, flattened into a stark, unwavering horizontal. Nurses burst into the room, their movements a blur of controlled panic. "Code Blue! ICU 3! Code Blue!" a voice shouted down the hall. Liam froze, a block of ice forming in his chest. Chloe startled awake, her small hands clutching his shirt, her eyes wide with a terror that mirrored his own. "Daddy, what's wrong with Mommy?" A doctor gently but firmly guided him and Chloe toward the door. "Sir, you need to step outside. We need room to work." The world dissolved into a cacophony of medical jargon, the squeal of wheels, the urgent commands. Liam stood in the hallway, pressed against the cool wall, holding Chloe so tightly he could feel her small heart hammering against his ribs. He watched through the glass panel as they swarmed around Emily's bed, a maelstrom of blue scrubs and focused intensity. He saw the paddles, heard the muffled command, "Clear!" and watched as Emily's body jolted on the bed. Once, twice. His own breath hitched, his vision blurred. The man who could move global markets with a single decision, who could build and dismantle empires from a leather chair, was utterly, terrifyingly powerless. He was just a man watching the woman he loved die. Chloe began to sob, a raw, broken sound that shattered the last of his composure. "I want my mommy," she wailed, burying her face in his shoulder. He sank to the floor, his back sliding down the wall, and pulled his daughter into his arms, rocking her gently. He cradled the back of her head, his face contorted in an agony he had never known. In that moment, watching the desperate fight for Emily's life through a pane of glass, holding the weeping child who was a living piece of both of them, his regret finally burned away, incinerated by a white-hot protective rage. It was replaced by something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous, an unwavering, absolute resolve. He made a silent vow, a promise etched not in words, but in the very fiber of his being, a pledge to the universe and to whatever forces were listening. "They will not take you from her. I will not let them. I will burn their world to the ground first." Minutes bled into what felt like an eternity. Finally, the doctor emerged, his face grim, his scrubs damp with sweat. "We got her back," he said, his voice low and exhausted. "Her heart is beating, but she's unstable. The next 24 hours are critical. Whatever caused this, it put an incredible strain on her system." The words hit Liam with the force of a physical blow. Whatever caused this. It wasn't an accident. It was an attack. And it wasn't over. He looked down at Chloe, her tear-streaked face now quiet, her eyes filled with a fragile hope that terrified him. He had to end this. Now. He found a nurse he had come to trust, a kind woman named Maria, and spoke with a calm authority that belied the storm raging inside him. "Can you watch her for me? Just for a little while, I have to make some calls." Maria nodded, her expression full of sympathy, and gently took Chloe's hand. "Of course, we'll get her some juice." Liam walked out of the hospital waiting area and into the crisp New York night. The man who had entered those doors days ago, haunted and uncertain, was gone. In his place stood the Liam Vance the world knew and feared. He pulled out his secure phone, the one reserved for operations that could not fail, and dialed a number. "Find everything, Ghoul," he commanded, his voice devoid of emotion. "Emily Miller, investigative journalist. Focus on her last active project before the crash. I want every file, every source, every whisper. Use the entire network. I want the names of the people who put her in that hospital bed. You have 1 hour." He didn't wait for a response. He hung up and dialed another number. "I need a full security detail at New York Downtown Hospital, ICU, 3rd floor. Unmarked, invisible. Nothing gets in or out of that room without my authorization. And I want round-the-clock surveillance on a list of names I'm about to send you. I want to know when they breathe." His corporate offices, the gleaming steel and glass tower that served as the heart of his empire, became his war room. Data streamed in from every corner of the globe. His best cybersecurity team cracked encrypted files. His most tenacious private investigators chased down leads from Emily's hidden notebook, the one he'd found tucked away in her apartment. The pieces came together with chilling speed. It was a construction magnate, a man named Marcus Thorne, a man Liam had shared polite nods with at industry events. Thorne's company had been using substandard materials in a series of low-income housing projects. Emily had the evidence, the engineering reports, the whistleblower testimony. She was days from publishing a story that would not only bankrupt Thorne, but send him to prison for manslaughter. Her car crash was no accident, it was a botched assassination. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Thorne was being honored that very night at the annual Metropolitan Foundation Gala, a lavish event celebrating the city's most powerful philanthropists. The hypocrisy was staggering. The man who built death traps for the poor was about to receive an award for his charity. Liam didn't hesitate. He knew what he had to do. 2 hours later, he walked into the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of powerful conversations. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his expression unreadable. Heads turned, whispers followed him. The reclusive Liam Vance never attended these events. His presence was an anomaly, a disruption in their predictable, gilded world. He ignored them all, his eyes scanning the room until he found his target. Marcus Thorne was on stage, basking in the glow of the spotlight, a self-satisfied smile on his face as he accepted a crystal award. Liam walked directly toward the stage, his footsteps silent but purposeful on the plush carpet. He ascended the side steps just as Thorne was finishing his speech about corporate responsibility. The event coordinator tried to intercept him, but a single cold look from Liam stopped her in her tracks. He took the microphone from the podium. A confused silence fell over the ballroom. "Good evening," Liam began, his voice calm, amplified, and carrying to every corner of the room. "My name is Liam Vance, and I'm here to talk about the real price of construction." He looked directly at Marcus Thorne, whose smile had frozen on his face. "Some of you know me as a businessman," Liam continued. "But tonight I'm not here to talk about profits. I'm here to talk about a woman named Emily Miller." A photo of Emily, vibrant and smiling, appeared on the massive screens behind him, replacing the gala's logo. Gasps rippled through the audience. "She's a journalist, A brilliant one. She's also the mother of a 7-year-old girl. And right now she is lying in an ICU bed, fighting for her life because she discovered a truth that Marcus Thorne tried to bury under cheap concrete and faulty steel. Thorne's face went pale. He started to speak, but Liam's voice cut through him like glass. Mr. Thorne's company, Thorne Development, has been cutting corners for years, building residential towers that are little more than beautifully decorated coffins. Emily had the proof. She was going to expose him, so he tried to silence her. He arranged for her car to be run off the road. Documents, engineering reports, and a secretly recorded conversation of Thorne ordering the hit flashed across the screens. The ballroom was utterly silent, the shock palpable. Liam's voice softened, but it lost none of its intensity. It became something raw, personal, and devastating. Marcus Thorne tried to take 2 people from me, he said, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of New York's elite. He tried to take the most courageous woman I have ever known, and he tried to take away a little girl's mother. That little girl is my daughter. Her name is Chloe. The final bombshell landed. The reclusive billionaire, the man who guarded his privacy with an iron will, was laying his soul bare in front of the world. You didn't just commit fraud, Marcus, Liam said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl as he took a step toward the trembling man. You tried to destroy my family. He turned back to the audience, his expression one of cold, hard certainty. Justice for the people you endangered will come from the courts, but justice for what you did to them, that comes from me. As if on cue, plainclothes police officers entered the ballroom and moved toward the stage. Thorne looked around wildly, a cornered animal, his facade of respectability shattered into a million pieces. The flashing lights of cameras began to strobe, capturing his downfall. Liam didn't stay to watch. His job here was done. He turned and walked off the stage, pulling his phone from his pocket as the chaos erupted behind him. He ignored the reporters shouting his name, his focus singular. He dialed the hospital, his heart pounding against his ribs. His only thought on the quiet room where a fragile metronomic beep held the entire universe. The explosion of Liam Vance's public confession was not a single clean blast, but a series of rolling aftershocks that rippled through the financial world, the media, and their own fragile, nascent life. The first few weeks were a siege. Paparazzi camped outside their apartment building, their long lenses like predatory snouts sniffing for any scrap of a story. Headlines screamed from every newsstand, painting Liam as either a fallen titan or a repentant saint. Lawyers and investigators, once the instruments of his corporate dominance, were now deployed as a shield, deflecting the relentless assault on their privacy and methodically dismantling the criminal network that had targeted Emily. Through it all, Liam's focus remained unnervingly singular. He, who had once managed a global empire from a sterile command center of monitors and data streams, now managed a world that consisted of 3 rooms, 2 precious lives, and one unwavering objective: to keep them safe. The chaos outside only served to solidify the sanctuary within. While the world debated his motives, Liam learned the quiet language of their home. He learned that Emily drank her coffee weak, a detail he mastered after a week of producing brews so strong they could strip paint. He learned the precise, almost ritualistic way she organized her research notes, a habit that had nearly cost her her life, but now represented her unyielding spirit. He mastered the school run, a daily gauntlet of cheerful chaos that was more terrifying and more rewarding than any hostile takeover he had ever orchestrated. He learned the specific cadence of Chloe's breathing when a nightmare threatened, his large hand a comforting weight on her small back until the darkness receded. These were not the grand, sweeping gestures of a billionaire trying to buy forgiveness. They were the small, consistent, and often clumsy acts of a man learning to be a father, a partner, a man. Slowly, as the legal battles concluded and the media's ravenous gaze shifted to the next scandal, the noise faded. What was left was the quiet rhythm of their new reality. Life was not a fairy tale. Emily's recovery was a slow, arduous journey, a testament to her profound inner strength. There were days of frustrating setbacks in physical therapy, moments of deep weariness that shadowed her eyes. But on those days, Liam was there, not with hollow platitudes, but with a steady presence, a shared silence, a cup of his now perfectly weak coffee. He saw the warrior in her, the woman who had fought alone for 7 years, and his admiration for her deepened into a love so profound it felt like an anchor in his once unmoored soul. For Chloe, the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The haunted, watchful little girl from the hospital corridor blossomed. Her laughter, once a rare and precious sound, now echoed freely through the small apartment. One afternoon, a new piece of art appeared on the refrigerator, held fast by a magnet shaped like a cartoon sun. It was a drawing rendered in Chloe's signature wobbly crayon strokes. It depicted 3 stick figures, a tall one with messy hair labeled Daddy, a slightly shorter one with a wide smile labeled Mommy, and a tiny one between them labeled Me. All 3 were holding hands under a bright yellow sun. Liam stood before it for a long time, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. He had acquired Picassos and Rothkos, masterpieces worth tens of millions, but none had ever moved him like this. This simple crayon-drawn declaration was his most valuable possession. It was proof of existence. It was a home. The seasons bled into one another, each one washing away a little more of the past and building a little more of their future. Years passed. The small apartment, once a temporary refuge, became a permanent home, its walls saturated with memories of movie nights, pillow forts, and the comforting scent of lopsided pancakes on Saturday mornings. Liam's empire continued to run, managed by a trusted board, but its master was irrevocably changed. His priorities were no longer quarterly reports and market shares, but parent-teacher conferences and the annual school play. He had discovered a richness in the mundane that his billions could never buy. One crisp autumn evening, the air was filled with the scent of a simple chicken dinner Emily had cooked. Chloe was at the small kitchen table, diligently finishing her homework, her brow furrowed in concentration. The fluorescent light of the kitchen, a light he once would have found harsh and unforgiving, now felt warm, intimate. It illuminated the quiet contentment of their shared life. Liam watched Emily as she moved around the kitchen, her steps now steady and sure, a faint, almost invisible scar near her temple, the only remaining physical trace of their ordeal. His heart, a muscle he had kept dormant for most of his life, swelled with a feeling so immense it threatened to break through his ribs. This was it. This was the moment. His hands, which had once signed billion-dollar contracts without a tremor, felt slick with nervous sweat. He walked over to where Emily was standing by the sink and took the dish towel from her hand. She looked up at him, a questioning smile playing on her lips. "Everything okay, Liam?" she asked, her eyes searching his. He didn't answer with words. Instead, in the cramped space between the refrigerator and the stove, the man who had once commanded armies of executives and brought nations to their economic knees slowly lowered himself onto one knee. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and a hope she had long suppressed. Before Liam could speak, a small voice cut through the charged silence. "I want to." They both turned to look at Chloe. She had abandoned her homework and was standing beside them, her own blue eyes so like his, shining with an unshakable certainty. She reached out and took her mother's hand, her small fingers lacing through Emily's. "I want to," Chloe repeated, her voice ringing with the clarity of a child who had witnessed a miracle. "Now you ask, Mom." Tears welled in Liam's eyes as he looked from his daughter's trusting face back to the woman he loved. He cleared his throat, his voice thick with an emotion that was 7 years in the making. "Emily Miller," he began, his voice raw and vulnerable. "You and Chloe, you are my entire world. You saved me from a life that wasn't worth living. Will you marry me? Will you let us officially be what we already are?" Their wedding was not held in a grand cathedral or a lavish ballroom. It was held in a small, unpretentious garden, tucked behind a humble local church, under the soft, forgiving glow of a late afternoon sun. A handful of their closest friends gathered on simple wooden chairs. Chloe, their sole attendant, stood between them, holding both of their hands. There were no flashing cameras, no sensational headlines, no fireworks painting the sky. There was only the quiet sincerity of their vows, promises whispered not of wealth or status, but of unwavering presence and shared tomorrows. 3 people, 1 home, Liam promised, his voice breaking as he slid a simple gold band onto Emily's finger. He looked from her tear-streaked, smiling face to his daughter's beaming one. In that moment, he understood with absolute clarity that his true patrimony, his most precious and enduring asset, was not the billions sitting in offshore accounts, but the trembling, desperate voice that had reached him across continents one late night, so many years ago. It was the call that had pierced through the armor of his solitude and forced him, for the very first time in his life, to walk in the direction of something real. The billionaire who had once traded everything for control had found his very soul in the act of surrender, becoming a husband and father whose profound and quiet transformation shocked everyone, compelling them to witness the beautiful, redemptive power of a love that had refused to die.